college structures in the United States are a bit different than Ireland. So I went to a liberal arts college. My major was technically in neuroscience. So I studied neurobiology and I studied systems neuroscience, which has to do with the ways in which different regions of the brain coordinate and how that essentially links to behavior or to moods. So largely what I was studying was anxiety, resilience, and behavioral changes when people are in and out of stress states. About 2 years before I graduated with my bachelor's degree, though, I became very interested in how these questions were approached prior to the neuroscience, more kind of medical scientific model. So obviously questions of anxiety and how to make choices didn't arise with the functional MRI machine. People use that to try to answer them, but that's not the core of where those questions arise. So as I was kind of finishing a degree in a very methodological school of thought, I realized I was interested in what's at the core of those questions. So for me, part of landing at NUI Galway was, as Tanya was saying, kind of the ability to explore these questions in a way that was a structured master's program. So particularly in the States, sometimes the master's is considered kind of part of your PhD trajectory. I was not at that stage kind of fully convinced of what level of project I wanted to take on and didn't have kind of the structural backing to do so. So a master's made sense for me. And then the questions that I was hoping to answer, I was very lucky that Felix and Serena are quite experts in the field. So I had kind of honed my master's search by faculty and research area to make sure that I could be supported in the questions that I wanted to answer. So I encourage you to do that as well. Look through course materials, but also look through faculty and look through faculty interests at NUIG or at wherever you're evaluating master's programs. So that is largely how I landed in NUIG. While I was there, my thesis project had to do with existential ontologies, which is two big words to basically describe how do you situate what it means to be a human, and how do you think about that in a way that reflects that that's a question that occurs to humans as they exist. So kind of how do you grapple with trying to define what it is to exist as a person? Where does that question come from and how do you answer it? And particularly what I did for this was I compared two different thinkers. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I'm giving you this context so that I can apply it to what I do now. So what I do now is I work in a venture capital firm. So venture capital is a type of investing, and you invest into startup companies, so brand new companies. And the venture capital firm I work for is called SOSV. It's an international company with a global back office that's located in Cork. And the companies that we invest in are in both human health and planetary health. So obviously the connection is very clear. No, it's not. So kind of how did I land there? How does it relate to the master's? Without having ever seen Felix's slide, I landed largely on a lot of the points that he brings up around the types of transferable skills in argument evaluation, getting to the roots of what people are asking you and why they're asking it, and being able to synthesize materials that are coming from different thinkers, different schools of thought, or different audiences broadly. So I'll go through a few of those just to kind of reiterate how the master's helped me to accomplish this and to give you a bit of scope around, I work in a very non-academic setting. So these would have been skills that I highlighted during my interviewing process to be able to apply my master's to a field that's not directly within philosophy. So the first one of those that I'll go through is on pulling apart questions and statements to try to get to their root causes. So in a philosophy master's context, that's obviously going to be through thinkers and their works and kind of drawing commonalities between thinkers, or being able to take someone's conclusion and follow their logical steps, and to do that in reverse as well. So how do you look at a piece of work or at a thinker's kind of holistic works and get at what was the root question they're trying to answer? I apply that largely in a corporate setting, which looks a bit different, but in my workplace, for example, I might get 3 different questions from different departments of the company that are asking for specific pieces of information. But what's often most helpful is to ask them, why are you asking this question? Because oftentimes when you get to kind of the layers of a question that are underneath what someone's bringing to you, that's when you can start to find solutions that actually prevent the problem from happening in the first place. So an analogy for that, right, is like there could be a flooding bathroom, and what's more helpful, is it me bringing you a mop or me turning off your taps, which are still running, right? So the immediate problem isn't always what's best addressed to come to a solution. And I think the masters really taught me how to kind of do this type of getting to the root of different questions and problems. The next one is around synthesizing information. So that's kind of when you think about different thinkers and you try to pull their ideas together, or to get them to talk to each other, if you will. So people who use different vocabularies, people who come from a multitude of different schools, when you're trying to compare authors, and then synthesize what the argument is across how these people might use different terminology, that can be true in a corporate setting as well. So being able to take asks from something like sales and marketing, as well as asks from people like data analytics, and say, okay, these two use very different languages, but what ultimately are they trying to get at? And how can I basically allow them to talk to each other to get at the answers that they're looking for? So that's where in philosophy, I was doing that between 2 thinkers, but in my job, I tend to do that between kind of approaches where someone might not be familiar with the language of a different department, but they do ultimately have the same questions. And then another is thinking in terms of processes and not only ends. So being able to look at something that you're taught, or look at something that you've been asked to do, and think through what are all of the different steps that create the process to get to this answer. And again, is there a step within that process or that argument, if you want to draw the parallel here to the masters, is there one of those that has either a fatal flaw or has a way that you could better approach the problem from a different angle? Being able to take complex asks or complex problems and break them into their steps that underlie that problem is something that you'll do quite frequently in the masters, and is something that beyond philosophy texts is something that you could end up doing in the corporate world if you go that direction. And then the final one is something Felix already highlighted, but again, being able to communicate all of these things. So it's great to be able to do them, and it's even better to be able to show that you can do them, or to bring to someone else the ideas that you have synthesized or broken down, and be able to talk through in different modalities or different terminologies exactly how you came to those conclusions. So all of these skills are ones that I feel I really honed during the masters, and are skills that I both highlighted while I was interviewing and have led to some of the bigger project successes in my role now. So I suppose the other thing that I will just mention to you is there's a lot to be said for transferable skills, but there's also a lot to be said for just being in the environment of the masters. So I benefited largely from being a small department. I did consider doing a PhD route and staying within academia, and some of your best resources are already there and already know you. So really take advantage of kind of utilizing the connections that are inherent within your program, whether that's part of the program that's kind of given to you or whether that's outside of it. So asking your faculty for their advice, they already tend to know your interests and your learning styles, and they're very familiar with the field. So they are in a great position to help you. And in general, I would say something that is important in hindsight that I wish I had done a bit earlier in my master's experience is utilizing and getting to know your networks, even if that's not something that at this exact moment you think is something that you're going to do. So I ended up in a field that I don't think I could have defined for you when I chose to do the master's, but appeared to me along the way and was a connection that I then later chose to take up. So be kind of very open to attending different events on campus, any suggestions of things that look like they're interesting to you, be able to kind of follow those along the way. So to close, I think the big point that I wanted to hammer home, which Tanya already brought up as well, is some of the learnings of the master's for me was learning that my life might not always look like how my 10-year plan thought it was going to. So you're all kind of at a decision-making time of your life, and obviously take those decisions seriously. But I think one of the big learnings of the philosophy masters as well was to follow out questions and follow out interests and curiosities, even if those land you somewhere that you didn't ultimately kind of have set in your plan from the beginning. There's a really interesting Stanford commencement speech from Steve Jobs. I'll put a link in the chat in a bit. He gave it in 2005, but he talks about that the dots or the points of your life actually only make sense when you look at them backwards. And looking at them forwards, it can be very confusing how different steps ultimately tie to where you are today. But each of those experiences, whether you think they were a great move or a misstep, they ultimately lead you to the opportunities in the past that you get to explore later. So the master's has been very helpful to me. I hope you choose to take it. And if you don't, I hope that you are able to follow whatever path makes sense to you.